Greetings from New York City and Columbia Business School, Executive Education. My name is Scott Gardner, and I'm very happy to be here today with Professor Sheena Iyengar for the Art and Science of Choosing Wisely webinar. Before we begin with Professor Iyengar, I'd like to go over a few quick logistics. First, a recording of the webinar will be sent to you. Second, if you'd like to tweet about the webinar, please do it our hashtag CBSExecEd. And finally, we always encourage you to upload your questions throughout the webinar. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. I'm very happy today to be with Professor Sheena Iyengar. She is the inaugural S.T. Lee Professor of Business at Columbia Business School, considered one of the world's leading experts on choice. Her book, The Art of Choosing, received one of the 6 Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Books of the Year awards and was ranked number 3 on Amazon.com Best Business and Investing Books. She has also received the Presidential Early Career Award in 2002 and has been voted among the top 50 most influential business thinkers by Thinkers 50 and rated one of the world's best business school professors by Poets and Quants. Sheena, it's great to be with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very happy. So let's get started. I'm going to just kick this off by asking you a question. How is choice changing in the modern era?
It's changing a lot. So if you think about the last 50 years, there's been 3 big changes in our modern world. First of all, if I were to ask you how many choices you have today and how many choices you make in a typical week of your life, you'll say hundreds, thousands, millions. Some people say infinity. I actually go around the globe and I ask people this question. I have yet to have anybody tell me that they have no choices or only a handful. So we have a lot of choices. If you think about it, in the 1970s, the average U.S. grocery store had about 9,000 products in it. Today, the average grocery store has over 40,000 products. Walmart has over 1 million products. Starbucks offers you just 87,000 drink combinations. If you go to Amazon, it has close to 300 million different products on it. And those are just the brick and mortar. If you want to look at the kinds of choices that we never even thought about not too long ago, like, for example, right now, there are 6,000 different online dating sites around the globe, 2,500 of which are just here in the United States. 1 billion swipes on Tinder every single day. And these dating websites are very niche. I mean, you could do gluten-free, you can do farmers only, cat lovers. I mean, you pick your interest. So we have a lot of choice. We also have a lot of information. So IBM estimates right now that you have about 2.5 quintillion bits of information that are generated every single day. It's also estimated that working individuals in a developed country, typically, if you look at the amount of information coming at you subconsciously, consciously, it's the equivalent of reading about 174 papers in a day. Wow. That's how much information you are trying to process with all the ads, all the stuff coming at you through social media, on your phones, etc. And the third biggest change really has been innovation. So, in part, because we created all this information, all this choice, we also created technologies like AI, machine learning, robotics, to actually help us deal with all this choice and information because we realized we couldn't handle it anymore. So we have all these technologies that are there to be decision aids. We have lots of innovation in the medical space that enables us to live longer and healthier. So if you think about all of these 3 things put together, it ends up making us ask some pretty big questions about ourselves. And those big questions are, well, in this age of customization, how am I going to make choices that mean something for me? I mean, I can be anything I want to be, anybody I want to be. How am I going to make all those choices? And given that technologies are increasingly looking more and more human, right? I even have fights now with my Alexa. Given that they're looking more human, we also end up asking ourselves the question, what does it mean to be human? What's the value of being a human? So I think those are the 3 big changes.
Yeah, that's huge, and it's overwhelming to people, I'm assuming. Especially, one of what you brought up, interestingly enough, is the healthcare. With the choices being out there, that is a very emotionally overwhelming proposition of choice. So those are all, it's not just choosing like, well, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? But you're talking a range of choices that goes all the way to like, how am I going to care for myself?
Well, in healthcare in particular, you can now decide how you want to look.
Right.
I mean, including eye color, like physical attributes. You can decide how you want to die. Right? That's an increasingly bigger choice.
Right.
We didn't know how, I mean, that used to be delegated to God.
Right.
And the other thing that used to be delegated to God was more and more, it looks like we can potentially influence the makeup of our still unto-be-born child.
Right.
That's huge.
Yeah. The choices are every single moment of your life, and they're easily accessed.
Yes.
So it's terrifying. Okay. Thrilling and terrifying, but overwhelming, and that's why I'm so glad you're here today. So let me ask you this. What does it mean to be choosy about choosing? You've written about that. What does that mean?
Yes, I know. It's one of the lines I often tell when I'm speaking to executives, when I'm speaking to students, young people, the MBA students. I always tell people that line. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. First off, I think in today's world, it's because you have so much choice that you actually, more than ever before, have to set goals. So I'm going to give you a question right now, and I want you to think about it as I'm talking about it. But I later, after this webinar is over, really want you to take some time and try to sincerely answer this question. Where do you want to be 1 year from today? Like, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want to accomplish 5 years from today? And what do you want to accomplish 10 years from today? Now, these are very important questions, and a lot of times when I tell people you really need to do this and think about this, they start to disagree with me and say, well, no, I can't answer this question because the world is changing so fast, and so it's so uncertain. How could I possibly figure out what I want to be when I don't even know what choices are going to be available to me? And my answer to you is that it is precisely because the world is changing so fast that you can't afford not to do this exercise. So that when you set goals, you set them not to achieve them, but to give you focus. So I'm going to give you one of my favorite examples of proof that shows this is so important. Take 3 groups of young people. One group thinks about where do they want to be in 1, 5, 10 years. Another group thinks about it, writes it down. A third group thinks about it, writes it down, and shares it with a trusted other. What happens? The people who write it down achieve 50% more. The people who write it down and share it with a trusted other achieve 75% more.
Wow.
Now, let me be clear. It's not that they're achieving what they set out to achieve. What goals helps you do is that as new information comes in, new choices come in, it enables you to look at it and say, nah, that doesn't really work. That's not going to help me. Or, yes, that could be potentially interesting in this way. So it serves as a compass. It helps you weed out all the junk and zero in your focus. And you need that more than ever before today. So my first big tip is you have to set goals. And then you have to be choosy about choosing. And I'll tell you why I say that. Even when you take something fun, like going to a grocery store and picking out some jams. Some of you might have heard about the jam study, and I'll tell you the true story about the jam study that many people have heard about, but they often hear different versions of it. And I ran that study way back in the 1990s, and here's the real story of that study. It was a big grocery store called Draeger's that offered people a lot of variety, and this was in the 90s where this was a new thing. And we decided to do a little experiment to see what happens when you give people so much choice. So we set up a tasting booth where we either put out 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And essentially we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to stop and sample some jam? Second, in which case were people more likely to buy a jar of jam? Now, when we tracked these customers, it turned out that more people stopped when they were 24 than when they were 6, 60% versus 40%. But when it came down to buying behavior, Now we saw the opposite effect. Of the people who stopped when there were 24 on display, only 3% of them bought a jar of jam, whereas of the people who stopped when there were 6 on display, 30% of them bought a jar of jam. Now, this was the first documentation that we get rather overwhelmed and confused when we have more and more choice. And there's been hundreds of studies looking at this across many, many domains, ranging from cool, fun things like jams, to going on dates, to medical decisions, to investment decisions, to choosing a job. And essentially, you see 3 negative consequences. The more choices people have, the less likely they are to make a choice, even when it goes against their best self-interest. The more choices people have, the worse choices they make. They make more errors. So you might say you want somebody who's really intelligent and funny that you want to date with, but actually when it comes down to having a lot of choice, you start just choosing on the basis of the very thing you said you didn't care about, like looks. Third, the more choices people have, the less satisfied we are with that which we've chosen. We're less satisfied with that cake we chose. We're less satisfied with that job we chose. We're less satisfied with that date we chose. So those are the 3 negative consequences across many different domains of choice. The reason, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but I'll tell you the really big one. It's our brains are limited. So that even back in the 1950s, George Miller, a very famous psychologist, documented a basic limitation of our minds. So what he found in this seminal paper called The Magical Number 7 plus or minus 2 is if I ask you to rank order from best to worst, a whole bunch of things, on taste, on appearance, beyond about 7, you get confused and you can't keep track of what you like and what you don't like. If I ask you to keep track of information, numbers, words, pictures, beyond about 7, that information starts to crumble away. So it wasn't an accident that our phone numbers are roughly within the 7 plus or minus 2 criteria. And so you live in a world today where it's not the case that you have to go out and look for choice. People are coming to you, giving you choice, 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 choice. Most of those choices are meaningless. And I would say the most important choice you have to make today is what choices to make, how to manage your time. And that's what I mean when I say be choosy about choosing. So there's a famous saying about the Pareto rule, which is that 80% of your success will come from 20% of your efforts. So, well,
say that again. I like that. That's really good.
So that 80% of your success will come from 20% of your efforts.
Interesting.
So here's the bad news for you. That means you're wasting 80% of your life. But you're getting a lot from that 20% if you choose right. And that's what we're essentially talking about. Get rid of the stuff that's distracting. Is this stuff actually taking away from my greater goals? You want to be choosy about choosing.
Great. So before we move to the next question, it's interesting for business leaders, for people who are leading teams. So the individual choosing, but also for a leader to have that sort of direction, to give possibly constraints and scarcity.
Absolutely.
So that there's a focus for the team, as opposed to this, whatever you want to do, let's be open. I mean, there's a scarcity principle, like the Cialdini's scarcity principle, or constraints actually is.
In fact, one of my old students, who's now a dean in a business school in Singapore, and I, years ago, as part of his dissertation, did a study where we looked at managers where they gave their engineers either no choice, or it was that laissez-faire style that you just talked about, or just a few choices, structured choice. And it was that last group, the structured choice, that not only performed the best, but also really thought of their managers as the most effective leaders.
That's so interesting. And I bet many people out there watching are thinking it would be the opposite, but really the studies show it's the opposite. Okay, well, great. Let's move on to the third question we have here is, what are the strategies that to get the most out of choice?
So we've talked about 2 ways in which you can manage your choice, right? So that essentially we're talking about how to bring back focus and how to limit the number of choices you make because we have only so much choosing energy. But I think there's another very important thing to think about in terms of how do you get the most from choice, particularly in today's choosing environment. So remember what I said earlier. We have more choice, we have more information, We have more technologies that are designed to help us in this choosing process. And we're also living longer and therefore can do more choosing and create more selves and more lives. And I would say that as technologies increasingly become more human-like, I think the biggest need for us to really understand and learn as a choosing skill is how to be innovative. Now, some of the research that I do looks, and increasingly this is what I do today, is I look at the relationship between choice and ideation. So how do you create new ideas? So I'm going to give you another little exercise to do, and you can do this for a personal problem. You can also do this for a work problem, and it's the basis of innovation, whether you're talking at the individual level or at an organizational level. But for now, I'm going to treat it as if we're talking about an individual level problem. So imagine you have a problem. It could be a small problem, it could be a big problem, just pick a problem. Now you take that problem, and now you, just on a piece of paper, generate as many ideas of solutions that you can think of. That's what I'm called the dream phase, and you can make that dreams as many as you want. Go for quantity, go at it. And don't ask yourself, does this really make sense? This is really stupid. Just do it.
Just put the ideas out there. Don't
Just put the ideas out there.
Don't judge it.
The more the better.
Yep.
Okay? Now put it aside. Now we often think that when we do this dreaming exercise, oh my God, I had ideas. That's great. That's really phenomenal. Must be I'm amazing. I'm creative. Well, I've got some bad news for you. Most of the ideas that you generate suck. And that's just true. Most of the ideas we generate suck. So maybe if 1 out of 10 ideas you come up with is not sucky, that's actually really good. So I'm not saying that you should hate the thing you came up with when you were in the shower or when you were running. Just know that you shouldn't be disappointed if it doesn't turn out to be as great as it felt like it was going to be at that moment of inspiration. So you jot it down. Now what you do is it's very important to go out and ask people. Now, a lot of times we think we should ask the people that are really close to us. And you should. You should ask your spouse. You should ask your really best friend, the people you're closest to. But they will often give you answers you've already thought of, because they're in the same echo chamber. What you want to do is ask strangers, people you don't know very well. So learn how to describe that problem in a way that you could describe to someone, that you meet at a coffee shop or in the subway. And they'll give you an idea from a totally different perspective. And when you get that idea, write it down. Now you're going to get these ideas and you're going to say, but Sheena, most of these ideas aren't very good. And I'm going to say again, most ideas that you're going to get from you and most ideas you're going to get from other people suck. If 2 out of the 10 ideas you get from other people don't suck or they lead to something great, that's progress. Ultimately, what you're going to do is you first collect ideas. Then you have a criteria. This is my problem. I've defined it. And I need a solution that's an improvement over my status quo. So it can't just be any good idea. It has to be an improvement over my status quo. So you're crossing them out. No, 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 no. This could be connected with this one. And that's how you pare it down. And little by little you pare it down, and you only start to choose once you have 1 or 2 that are an improvement over the status quo. Now I think this skill, which I know I've described very quickly, I think this skill of learning how to ideate is what's going to become the most powerful tool for us as choosers today. You're already seeing it with programs like design thinking, companies like IDEO. I don't think it's just in the space of people creating. This is in the space of all of us humans, because that's ultimately the value that each of us humans going forward brings. So there's a great quote by the French polymath Henri Poincaré, who once said that invention consists of avoiding the constructing of useless culminations and consists of the constructing of useful culminations which are an infinite minority. To invent is to discern, to choose. So allow me to propose to you a corollary, which is to choose is to invent. And so the real power of choice in this era of so much choice does not come from our ability to pick. It actually comes from our ability to construct those most meaningful options.
I love that. I love that. That's very powerful. We have about 10 minutes left, and before we get to a lot of questions that have come in, I wanted to ask you really quickly, there's a lot going on in the innovation field right now. What are you working on right now?
So I have created a new program designed to teach people the very skill we just talked about. How do you ideate? It's a course called Think Bigger, and it brings together what I think of as the best practices from artists, from design thinkers, as well as from all that we've learned from social scientists on how to choose well. And so I've created this course called Think Bigger. It's been doing very well in terms of really giving students the tools for how to create their futures, how to really ideate so that they can create what are the jobs they want to do, where they want to go in their futures. We're also about to launch this very course as well in the executive education program later on in the spring of 2019.
Great.
And it's called Think Bigger.
Think Bigger. Right. You know what I love? One of the things you said that I love is so true is that many times people, when it comes to creativity, to innovation, to choice, they think, well, I'm not in a creative field, right? I'm not a designer, I'm not an artist or whatever, but that's just, you're simply saying, and I've heard this from many of our other professors, that's not true. We are all creative. We all have to make these kind of choices, whether personally or professionally. It doesn't matter what business you're in.
Yes, and what I've been doing in my Think Bigger course is created a method by which no matter who you are, you're given the tools for coming up with useful innovations.
Right.
So essentially, even when the students come into class, they're told that in order to think big, you have to start by thinking bigger, and that what I mean by a big idea is an idea that will solve a problem that people have that affects, that you should dream that it should be able to affect or impact 1 billion lives.
Great. I love it. All right, so let's get to some of the questions. Many came in before the webinar and many have come in during, and we encourage you to keep uploading them for the next 8 minutes. Whatever we can't get to now, Sheena and I will stay afterwards and record the conversation continues and answer as many questions as we can get to then. But let's get started. So the first one from Carol. Very funny question here. What's the best way to choose on an app like Tinder? Start off light.
So as you know, Tinder gets 1 billion swipes on average a day. So I think what's really important to recognize about Tinder is you don't go to Tinder to find true love because you don't get enough information there to make a thoughtful choice. You're going to Tinder to find possibilities, to just simply to find some people that you could have a meeting with. So understand that when you're going into Tinder, these are random. You have no real knowledge about them. So you're going to have to make this criteria very, very, very simple. So, I don't know, maybe something about their aura, or maybe even something like there's just their appearance. And I wouldn't say that if you choose on the basis of appearance that that's shallow in this case. You have very little information to go off of. You're simply finding one tiny criteria that says, okay, I'm willing to give you a few minutes for a cup of coffee, but don't expect true love that way. It's just a way to expand your network of possibilities. The true love might come later.
Very hopeful. That's a hopeful message. I like that. All right, so second question is from Daniel. Is money directly proportional to choices? Isn't it having fewer choices feels like less?
So the reality about choice is that if you have no choice or very little choice, you feel trapped, right? And that's, we often critique people when they say, oh, well, I don't know if I want to get married or not. Like, what? This person's afraid of commitment. Well, look at the way you framed that, right? Should I get married or not? Should I have a child or not? Should I pursue this job or not? Should I pursue this strategy or not? Anytime you frame a choice as yes or no, you're going to feel more trapped. And that's also, by the way, not the best way to think about choice because it doesn't actually empower you. So I would say having zero choice and having one choice are both unempowering. Now, if you have too much choice and you can't keep track of them, that also feels overwhelming, frustrating. You get jaded. Try picking which color white you want for the wall of your office or your home, and it's just like, really, right? And so it's really that you want to give yourself a meaningful set of choices. Now, meaningful could mean anywhere from 3 to maybe 10 or 20. I mean, certainly as we develop expertise, we can understand more choices, but typically you want to land between 3 and 5 in terms of choices that really get you somewhere that you care about. So I would say moderation is very useful, and I would say if you look at the marketplace, whether you're looking at products that are very cheap, whether you're looking at products that are very expensive, those companies that have given us the ability to make us feel that we got a meaningful choice, those are the ones that are succeeding.
Interesting. And that's personal, and if you're leading a team, you know what
Absolutely.
I mean? To like narrow that down, it focuses the team, it focuses your life. I mean, I always like read the stories of people.
You got to give people limited choice, but not too much. And we all kind
Right.
of know this intuitively because we kind of know not to give our 2-year-old 500 different kinds of cereal. And we also know the experience of constantly telling our child no and watching them rebel.
Right.
So
right.
we do know this somewhat intuitively.
Right, right. And there's a little bit, you're saying there's more of a, it's not a zero-sum choice or one, and it's not 5,000 choices. There's an in-between there, and moderation is key. So, like that.
Usually you start to make better choices around 3, right?
Yeah.
Because once you have 2, what happens when you have 2 is those 2 options, you start to see the trade-offs associated with the 2, and they're usually the one is very good at this, and the other
Right.
one is really bad at that, or really good at that, bad at that, etc. When you get to 3, you start to see new possibilities that might be more meaningful.
Oh, I like that. Okay, great. All right, this is from Joan. Has new insights in decision-making influenced the fields of psychology, sociology, and even politics, from the decision sciences to business management strategies to international affairs? Which rising trends and or fields of innovation do you think we should be watching out for?
Wow. Okay. So I think there's a lot to say to that question. I do think that
We have 3 minutes.
oh boy. All right. So I'll make this really quick. So the science on choice has been affecting all of those fields. Certainly, sociologists have been focusing in on, sociologists and political scientists have been zeroing in on, just look at our election. In many ways, we had a lot of candidates for the Republican Party, and Trump was the most different. And whatever opinion you may have about whether you like him or dislike him, he stood out in a sea of choice, and all the other choices other than Trump didn't look very differentiable. I think right now, if you look at what's happening in the business world and in our own individual lives, we're all asking ourselves the question, how do we as an individual, how do we as a set of humans, a collection of humans, how do I distinguish myself from every other human? How do I distinguish myself from all these technologies? What is it about me that's unique? And make sure that I'm not replicable. And I think to the extent that companies either manage to do that well or make us feel that we're able to be unique, those are the ones that succeed. I also think the other thing that we're already beginning to see and are going to see more of is to the extent that we are able to figure out what is it about being a human that's valuable, that will actually gain in value. So, and you're starting to see that. There's a lot more people that are doing things that you can, at least for the moment, only get from a human, like a leadership coach or a well-being coach or mindfulness. I mean, we are valuing that human touch more than ever before.
Great. Let me just do one final quick question for you. We've got about a minute left. How do you handle the fear of making the wrong choice?
Okay. Well, that's a great question. So I don't think that you can ever know if you've made a right or wrong choice. So I think you should just accept that. I think what you can do when you're making a difficult decision is understand what's the worst possible outcome for you. If I were to choose this, here's the worst thing that could happen. Is that still an improvement over my status quo? And if it's not, then obviously you don't choose it. Or I could still live with that. It's still worth it to me. And you look at the best possible outcome that could happen if you make this choice. Now, the reality is you're never going to get the worst or the best. What you're going to get is more than likely somewhere in between those two, and which one it's closer to, we don't know. But as long as you've chosen something that you're able to live with, even if the worst happens, you choose it. And then you keep choosing along the way to try to make it work out as best as you can. And that's the most you can ever expect and hope for from choice.
Great. Well, Sheena, thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you.
us today. A lot of questions came in, so Sheena and I are going to end the live webinar right now, and we're going to tape The Conversation Continues with all of your questions that came in. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you.